you today? So I have another mystery that I thought that I would share with you. So for this one, it's on the series Place. So it's the lost continent of Atlantis. So this is kind of going into Greek philosophers and what they believed. So the idea of a lost but highly advanced civilization has captured the interest of people for centuries. Perhaps the most compelling of these tales is the story of Atlantis. So the story keeps appearing again and again in books, television shows, movies. So we're going to talk a little bit about where it originated and if it is actually true today. So Plato's Atlantis. So the story of the lost continent, Atlantis, starts in 355 BC with the Greek philosopher Plato. Plato had planned to write a trilogy of books discussing the nature of man, the creation of the world, and the story of Atlantis, as well as other subjects. Only the first book was ever completed. The second book was abandoned partway through, and the final book was never even started. So Plato uses dialogues to express his ideas, and this type of writing, his thoughts are explored in a series of arguments and debates between the characters in the story. So Plato often used real people in his dialogues, such as his teacher, but the words he gave them were on his own. So in Plato's book, Timaeus, it tells the story of a character named Cretias, and which tells an account of the Atlantis that has been in his family for generations. So according to the character, the story was originally told to his ancestor, Solon, by a priest during Solon's visit to Egypt. So there had been a powerful empire located to the west of the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, on the island of the Atlantic Ocean. The nation there had been established by the god of the sea. Poseidon fathered 5 sets of twins on the island. The firstborn, Atlas, had the continent and surrounding ocean named for him. The god of the sea divided the land into 10 sections, each to be ruled by a son or his heirs. So the capital city of Atlantis was a marvel of architecture and engineering. The city was composed of a series of concrete walls and canals. At the very center was a hill, and on the top of a temple, inside was a gold statue of the god of the sea, showing him driving 6 winged horses. About 9,000 years later, or 9,000 years before the time of Plato, after the people of Atlantis became corrupt and greedy, the gods decided to destroy them. A violent earthquake shook the land, giant waves rolled over the shores, and the island sank into the sea, never to be seen again. So the story of Atlantis is known as just kind of a fable used by Plato to make a point, or is there some reason he was referring to a real place? So at numerous points in the dialogues, Plato's characters refer to the story of Atlantis as genuine history, and being with the realm of fact, Plato also seems to put into the story a lot of detail about Atlantis that would be unnecessary if he had intended to use it only as a literary device. So there's multiple locations, or possible locations for Atlantis. So kind of thinking about Greece, Egypt, within the Mediterranean Sea, and then also Atlantic Ocean over there. So we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that though. So if we make the assumption that Atlantis was a real place, it seems like it could be found west of the Strait of Gibraltar near the Azores Islands. In 1882, a man named Ignatius Donnelly published a book titled Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. Donnelly, an American politician, had come to the belief that Plato's story represented actual historical fact. He located Atlantis in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, suggesting the Azores Islands represented what remained of the highest mountain peaks. Donnelly said he had studied zoology and geology and had come to the conclusion that civilization itself had begun with the Atlanteans and had spread out throughout the world as the Atlanteans established colonies in places like Egypt and Peru. Donnelly's book became a worldwide bestseller, but researchers could not take Donnelly's theories seriously as he offered no proof for his ideas. As time went on, it started to become obvious that Donnelly's theories were faulty. Modern scientific surveys of the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean shows it is covered with a blanket of sediment that must have taken millions of years to accumulate. There is no sign of a sunken island continent. So there are other candidates. So people, candidates of the location of Atlantis. So people also think it could have been in Switzerland or in the middle of Europe or New Zealand in the Pacific Ocean. So some people also believe that it could have been located in Brazil or Spain. So people have also made cases for places in Switzerland, in the middle of Europe, New Zealand, in the Pacific Ocean. Perry Fawcett thought it might have been located in Brazil. Another kind of interesting theory about it is, are the pyramids a clue? So Lewis Spence, a Scottish writer, published several books on the Atlantis in the early 20th century. He was fascinated by the pyramids constructed by ancient races in different parts of the globe. So Spence wondered if the creation of the pyramids in diverse areas such as South America and Egypt indicated that these places had all been colonies of the Atlantis, and if the Atlanteans were the original pyramid makers. While the idea is interesting, the historians today don't, really believe that trend and kind of think that the pyramids occurred independently in different locations. So another theory is Atlantis in Spain. So recently, a research team led by Professor Richard Freund at the University of Hartford has claimed that they have evidence that the city may be buried under the ocean, not under the ocean, but along the coast of Spain in the marshlands of Donana National Park. So geological studies have shown that at one time this marsh was a huge bay connected to the Atlantic Ocean. The team, using radar technology, digital mapping, and satellite imagery, believes that they can see signs of ringed city that once occupied the bay with canals similar to those described by Plato. There's evidence that a number of tsunamis have swept this area over the centuries, and Freund thinks that this is one of, the things that may have destroyed the city. So after the disaster, survivors may have moved inland and created a number of what Freund thinks are memorial sites to Atlantis. Other scientists have explored the area, do not agree with him, though they do admit that a city by the name of Tartessos occupied the area around the 4th century BC. Freund believes that Tartessos and Atlantis may just be different names for the same city. As far back as the 1920s historian Adolf Schulten had suggested that Plato had used the real city of Tartessos as the source for his Atlantis legend. So the strongest evidence for real Atlantis, however, is not in Spain, but closer to Plato's home in Greece. The idea started with K.T. Frost, a professor of history at the Queen's University in Belfast. Later, Spyridon Marinouts, an archaeologist, and A.G. Galanopoulos, a seismologist, added evidence to Frost's ideas. So, the Minoan connection, so there is a connection there. So Frost suggested that instead of being west of the Pillars of Hercules, Atlantis was east. So he also thought that the catastrophic end of the island has come not 9,000 years before Plato's time, but only 900. So if this was true, the land of Atlantis might already be a well-known place, even in Plato's time. So the island of Crete. So Crete is now a part of modern Greece and lies just south of Athens across part of the Mediterranean Sea. Before 1500 BC, it was the seat of the Minoan Empire, and the Minoans dominated the eastern Mediterranean with a powerful navy and probably extracted tribute from other surrounding nations. So archaeological excavations have shown that the Minoan Crete was probably one of the most sophisticated cultures of its time. It had splendid architecture and art. A code of laws gave women equal legal status to men. Agriculture was highly developed, and an extensive irrigation system existed. So then, seemingly in a blink of an eye, the Minoan civilization disappeared. Geological studies have shown that on an island we now know as Santorinas, located just 80 miles to the north of Crete, a disaster occurred that was capable of toppling the Minoan state. So Santorini. So Santorini today is a lush Mediterranean paradise consisting of several islands in a ring shape. So 2,500 years ago, though, it was a single large island, and with the volcano in the center. The volcano blew itself apart in a massive explosion around 1500 BC. So to understand the effect of such an explosion, scientists have compared it with the most powerful volcanic explosion in historic times. This occurred on the island of Krakatoa in 1883. There was a giant wave or a tsunami 120 feet high, and it raced across the sea and hit the neighboring islands. Ash was thrown up in the air, blackened the skies for 3 days, and the sound of the explosion was heard as far as 3,000 miles away. So the explosion at Santorini was 4 times as powerful as Krakatoa. So the tsunami that hit Crete must have traveled inland for over half a mile, destroying any coastal towns or cities. The great Minoan fleet of ships were all sunk in a few seconds. Overnight, the powerful Minoan Empire was crushed, and Crete changed to a political backwater. One can hardly imagine a catastrophe like that. So that was Plato's description of Atlantis' fate and the destruction of Crete. So many of the details of the Atlantis story fit with what is now known about Crete. Women had a relatively high political status, both cultures were peaceful, and both enjoyed the unusual sport of ritualistic bull leaping, where an unarmed man wrestled and jumped over a bull. And the fall of Minoans is the story of how Atlantis, so how did Plato get the location and time wrong? So it's suggested that there was a mistake during translation of some of the figures from Egyptian to Greek, and an extra 0 added. So this would mean 900 years ago became 9,000. And the distance from Egypt to Atlantis went from 250 miles to 2,500. So if this is true, Plato would have been forced to assume the location of the island continent to be squarely in the Atlantic Ocean. So not everyone accepts the Monona and Crete theory of the story of Atlantis, but until a convincing case can be made for some other place, maybe it's the best guess for now. And then I have, okay, so yeah, that is all that I have for the last continent of Atlantis. Let me know what you think happened or your theory on it, and I'm excited to hear them.